Hi, this is National Master Dan Heisman, and we're here with the second video in our three-part series for Dan Lona's Chess Improvement Club community. In our first video, we talked about some of the overviews of ways to get better. For instance, the improvement feedback loop, which includes studying, playing, and getting feedback. Then some of the areas that could be thought of inside the loop, like do you gain knowledge? Do you add new capabilities, new skills? You add knowledge, you add skills, you remove your things that you misunderstand, those kind of things. In today's video, we're going to talk about the three showstoppers and maybe something about the stages of the game and what you need to do in each stage of the game. The three showstoppers are the things that I found over the years, which are the three most important things to work on to get you up to about 1700 FIDE or USCF. And those three are the safety of your moves and your opponent's moves, which of course, when they're not safe, we call that tactics. Secondly is the activity of your army, making sure all your pieces are doing something all the time, developing all your pieces in the opening efficiently and safely and quickly. And thirdly, time management. Not only how well you use your time throughout the entire game, but how well you use your time on each move, which I call macro time management and micro time management. In order to show you how important some of these things are, there's an old engine that was playing on the Internet Chess Club that they programmed to play weekly by only looking ahead 4 ply. If you don't know what a ply is half a move. When a game starts E4, E5, that's the first move for both players, but it's 2 ply. And when we have engines look ahead in a game, we measure that in ply. We say the engine is looking 23 ply ahead, which is 11.5 moves. Well, in order to get this computer to play weekly, the programmer decided that it would make it completely blind after 4 ply. In other words, the computer could see 2 moves ahead, but it couldn't see 2.5 moves ahead. It could only see 4 ply and not 5. And within those 4 ply, the computer always played safely. It never lost any material within 4 ply, but if you could win something that took 5 ply, then the computer couldn't see that. Similarly, if you did something bad against that engine and the engine could see it within 4 ply, the engine would always win the material. But if you made a mistake that took 5 ply to take advantage of, the computer couldn't see it. Other than that, the computer had only rudimentary programming of knowledge, just rudimentary openings, rudimentary strategy. Mainly, it was just a computer that was there to play safely for 2 moves. And I asked people, what do you think that program's USCF or FIDE equivalent rating was? And the answer is 1650. 1650 just by playing 2 moves ahead safely, making sure you don't make a move where your opponent then goes check and you lose a piece, or he makes a threat and you can't meet it. That's the kind of thing the engine would avoid, but other than that, it was pretty dumb engine. So it played 1650. Well, that tells you how tremendously important basic safety is, and making sure that not only you can win material against your opponent, but also that your moves are safe. A lot of people, because when they study books, the books are white to play and win, white to play and mate. They're pretty good about seeing when their opponent doesn't make safe moves, but they don't apply the same thing in reverse for defense to say, if I make this move, is my move safe? If you're not checking on every move to see if your move is safe, in other words, if you make a move, can your opponent make a check, a capture, or a threat against you that you can't meet on the next move? If you're not checking to see if that's true, I call that hope chess. Why do I call that hope chess? Because if you make a move and your opponent makes a threat, and you hadn't anticipated that threat and made sure you could already meet it on the next move, then when you see it, you go, uh-oh, what do I do now? And you hope that there's an answer. If there's an answer, then you're just lucky. And if there's no answer, that could be the end of the game, because it might be what's called an unstoppable threat. You can't let your opponent make unstoppable threats. When you're playing in slow games, every time you have a move, you have to make sure, if I make this move, I can answer every single one of his checks, captures, and threats on the next move. It's got to be safe. You have to look that sort of 1.5, 3 ply moves ahead in order to make sure that your moves are safe. So if you don't do that, and what I found in my studies of looking at my students' games and having them think out loud for me, is that most people rated below 1700 play some form of hope chess. The people below 12 or 1300 don't even pay much attention to what the opponent's doing. They don't really look to see what the opponent can do. Players between 1300 and 1700 do check pretty consistently what the opponent can do, but they mostly do it with pattern recognition. If they don't see any danger, they assume there isn't any danger. When I have a student rated 14 or 1500 make a move and then the opponent makes a threat that they can't meet, and I ask them, why did you allow such a move? The answer they almost always give me is, I didn't see it. And then I ask them the pertinent question, which was, okay, you didn't see it, but did you look for it? Because if you didn't look for it, then that's hope chess. And if you did look for it and you didn't find it, well, then you just you're human, you made a mistake. And a lot of times they say, well, yeah, this time I forgot to check for his checks, captures, and threats. I forgot to look for them on the next move. So they were playing hope chess, and then the opponent made an unstoppable threat, and they just lost the game or lost a piece or whatever it is that that unstoppable threat was allowed them to do. This is the single most important thing then for getting up to that 1700 level. If you're making moves that are not safe and your opponent can just make a threat on the next move and then you can't meet it because you didn't anticipate that threat, then you're playing hope chess, and it's going to be really hard to get your rating much above 1700 no matter how much you memorize the Caro-Can or the Lucena position or whatever it is that you're studying. Okay, so the safety of your moves and the safety of your opponent's moves. Most people understand the safety of your opponent's moves. Whenever somebody makes a move, the two questions you want to ask yourself are, one, is that move safe? Which means, do you have some sort of tactic anywhere on the board? It's not just the piece that moved that might not be safe. Maybe that piece was guarding something and it's no longer guarding. Or maybe you were threatening back rank mate and the piece that moved didn't stop the back rank mate. It's not the piece that moved that's you're worried about. It's the entire board. So you ask yourself, is that move safe? And the other thing you want to ask yourself about your opponent's moves are, what are all the pertinent things that that move does? Why do you ask what are all the pertinent things? Well, if you ask a different question, if you ask, why did he make that move? You might come up with a reason and then not look for other reasons. For instance, suppose you attack your opponent's queen with a pawn and he moves the queen and you say, why did he move the queen? Well, he moved the queen so you couldn't take it with a pawn. But it's very possible that queen move does several things in addition to saving the queen. It might make a threat or two that you have to pay attention to. So it's not enough to ask, why did someone make the move? You have to ask, what are all the pertinent things that move does? What are all the things? It might remove a guard. It might block a piece. There's lots and lots and lots of things that a move can do to affect the board. All right, so we're talking about right now about the three showstoppers. So showstopper number one is the things that make the things that make your moves safe and the things that check to see if your opponent's moves are not safe. The second one, as we said, is the activity of all your pieces. The big daddy principle, as I mentioned earlier, is make sure all your pieces are doing something all the time. You know, if you were a coach of a sports team, let's say you're a coach of a soccer team and you're allowed 11 people on the field. Well, if you're the coach of the soccer team and you don't start the game with 11 people on the field, you only put out 4, you're not going to win very many games if the other coach puts out 11. If you're a basketball coach and you're allowed 5 guys on the court and they play the national anthem and say, coach, let's go, you say, starting lineup, get out there, and hopefully you designated 5 people to get out there and not 2 or 3, assuming you're playing regular basketball 5-on-5. So chess is the same way. You have to get out all of your pieces. When I say pieces in this sense, I don't necessarily mean the pawns, but you have to move enough pawns to get some space. And your king, you have to find some safe place to tuck away for the middle game. So all 8, 9 pawns need to get to where they need to be going to get out of the opening. And later in the game, it's the same thing. You want to make sure all your pieces later in the game are doing something. There's a famous principle besides use all your pieces all the time, which has something to do with this, and it's called find your worst piece and make it better. So if neither side has a tactic and you're not sure what to do, look at a piece that around the board that might be doing nothing and ask yourself, where could he possibly do something and how do I get him there? And that could be like a good mini plan for your activity. So you're always trying to make sure all your pieces are doing something. And if you win a piece and you're up a piece, it's even more important because you're on the power play. It's like a hockey team where the other team has committed a penalty and you have more men on the ice now. So when you have more men on the ice, if you're not using all the pieces to do something, then it's not as powerful. You might not be able to take advantage of the fact that your opponent has less pieces if you're not using all your pieces. Similarly, in the end game, where the king is worth about 4¼ pawns of fighting value, if you're slow in getting your king into the fight, if you're using it like it's the middle game and you're tucking it away when in fact it's late in the game and it's fairly safe for you to bring your king out, if you delay doing that and your opponent doesn't, he has the advantage that he has more pieces fighting than you do, and that makes a big problem. So the king is a strong fighting piece in the end game, and when we say you want to use all your pieces all the time, that very, very obviously includes the king at the latter stage of the game. The third thing inside the 3 showstoppers is time management. The macro time management, which is the time management you're going to use for the entire game, is you want to play whatever time limit you're playing. Let's say you're playing a 65 game, 60 minutes with a 5-second increment. You want to finish the game with, 17 seconds on the clock or something like that. You're trying to pace yourself to use almost all your time, but not so slow that you get into unnecessary time pressure. Unnecessary time pressure is where you take longer on non-critical moves than you should, and you run yourself low on time, and then at the end of the game, you find yourself with much less time than you need when there's critical moves near the end of the game. So good macro time management means using almost all your time, but not getting into unnecessary time pressure, so that at the end of the game, you have plenty of time to play the end game, and you pace yourself so that at the end of the game, you're pretty low on time. So that's macro time management. Micro time management is allocating the right amount of time to each move. If you're playing a 60-minute game and there's an average of 40 moves, that's an average of 1.5 minutes a move or 90 seconds a move. But you don't want to take exactly 90 seconds on each move. For instance, in your book moves in the opening, you want to play them very, very quickly. You want to save your time for the complicated critical moves that occur later in the game. This is called criticality assessment. You want to assess the position and see how likely is it that this move can change the outcome of the game. For instance, if you're in a position where you're in the end game and you have 20 moves and 1 move wins and 1 move draws and 18 move loses, then that's highly critical that you find the one that wins. Otherwise, you're not going to win. And if you don't even find the second best move that draws, then you lose the game. So critical moves are ones where finding the best move or moves is very important toward whether or not you might win the game. Early in the game, very early, when you're just developing your pieces, a lot of the moves are not very critical. Like if you're out of your book in the opening, but you're just trying to figure out which rook to move to the middle first, it's probably not that critical. So you want to take a lot less than your average amount of time. If you're playing that 65 game and you have 90 seconds per move plus the 5-second increment, let's say 95 seconds a move, then if you're in one of those positions in the opening where you're just developing a piece and neither side has any tactics, you probably don't want to take more than 30 or 40 seconds on such a move. And you want to build up your average time advantage for the remainder of the game so that later on when you have complicated moves and critical moves, if you need to take, let's say in a 90-minute game, if you need to take 10 minutes on a move, or maybe on 3 or 4 moves you need to take 5 or 6 or 7 minutes, you have that, even though the average is only 1.5. The only way you can get 5 or 10 minutes on 2 or 3 moves in a game, if it's a 90-minute game and you go 40 moves, would be to play a whole bunch of moves in way less than 90 seconds so that you have that extra time when you need it. So that I call micro time management. So those are the big 3, the 3 showstoppers. If you're good at those 3, if you're very good about making sure your moves are safe and checking to see if your opponent's moves are safe, if you're using all your pieces all the time at every aspect of the game, opening, middle game, and end game, and if you're managing your time well, it's probably that you don't need a ton of strategy to get up to about 1,700 FIDE or USCF. I know for some of you that seems like a dream, but actually that can be. And that's why I tell people, you start by doing things like reading lots and lots and lots of annotated master games, instructive anthologies, and doing easy tactical positions, easy tactical puzzles like the ones in the Giannotto's book or the Bain book, over and over again until you get sick of them, because you're not trying to solve them. We know they're easy. That's why everybody can solve them. you're trying to recognize them. So if you have a move in a game and your move isn't safe and you go, should I make that move? And then you recognize, oh, I've seen something like this. He can remove the guard and do this and this, and I lose a pawn. Then you reject that candidate move and you play a different move. So that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to really get good at recognizing those things fairly quickly and accurately. So you're not spending a lot of time trying to figure out if your moves are safe, or a lot of time trying to figure out if your opponent's moves are not safe. Now, obviously, sometimes there's very complicated cases where the moves are not safe, and it does take a lot of time. But a lot of the games that my students lose, or when they show me games that they win on relatively easy tactics, not on finding things that you need a computer or a master to find. Their opponent makes a really bad mistake. They can find an easy tactic to win material and eventually win by attrition. Or maybe they lose the game because they forgot to check to see if their move was safe, and next thing you know, their opponent makes a threat that they can't meet. Okay, we have a couple minutes left. Let's talk about the 3 phases of the chess game and what we're going to do to get you better. In the opening, you're going to learn what's called tabias. Tabias are the standard moves in the opening that you want to play. So if you're learning the open defense to the Ruy Lopez, and you're learning e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castles, knight takes e4. Oh, you can't follow that? All right, let's do it on the screen. Knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castle, and you decide when you get to this position you want to play the open defense, knight takes e4. So you might learn the tabia, which are the main moves. If we look at the database, I can probably move this over a little bit. You can see some of the database on the right there. You can see what you're going to learn is if he plays d4, you want to play b5. When he saves the bishop, you want to play d5, and then he'll win the pawn back, threatening your d-pawn, and then you're going to play bishop e6. And at this point, white has a choice of several different moves, knight bd2 or c3 or queen e2. But learning it up to here, this would be an initial tabia for the open Ruy Lopez. So that's what you're going to do in the opening. You're going to learn a tabia. You want to look up every game. You want to play lots of games. You could play speed games after speed games. Look up your openings after speed games and ask, let me learn another move. For instance, suppose your opponent now plays queen e2 and you have no idea what to do. Well, you can go to the database and it says bishop e7 is the main move. Or you could turn on the engine and the engine says, yep, bishop e7 is not only the main move, it's the best move according to the engine. So now you learned in that speed game, someone played queen e2 against you. You didn't know what to do. After the game, you looked it up. You found bishop e7. You say, now I know when I play the open Ruy Lopez and they play the main tabia, if they play the queen e2 line, I'm going to play bishop e7. So you try to learn at least one new move out of each game that you play. Now, if your opponent plays a crazy opening like a4, you're not going to learn very much. But if they play something in your main lines, you want to do that. Now, obviously, if you're learning the open variation of the Ruy Lopez, and you say every time someone plays e4, I'm going to play e5, they don't have to play the Ruy Lopez. They might play knight f3, knight c6, and play the Italian. Well, now you need a tabia against the Italian. You could learn a line in the gioco piano. You could learn a two knights defense. Those would be the 2 main moves. And learn a tabia, a series of moves that you would play in the main line of these openings. So you're always trying to slowly learn your openings. You rotate your openings so you learn different openings and different pawn structures. In the middle game, there's, the main way to learn middle games is to analyze with good players, analyze your games with them, go over the games with the engine, but you can also read instructive game anthologies. There's all kinds of middle game principles that you want to learn about, like, for instance, Steinitz's rule, which is, you should only really attack in a part of the board where you have an advantage. And you're going to recognize what Jeremy Silman calls imbalances. He has the famous book, How to Reassess Your Chess, which I don't recommend till people get to about 1700. Why? Because if you don't make safe moves for yourself consistently and you don't recognize them for your opponent, then learning about imbalances makes you think about the wrong things. You want to think about the safety of the pieces, not the subtle strategy things. The fact that you don't need a ton of strategy I actually wrote a novice nook many years ago called How Much Strategy to Start, and I said, I bet in 7 pages of a novice nook I can put most of the strategy that you would need to know to get all the way up to 16 or 1700 if you're doing the 3 showstoppers. And I have a video on my channel, Dan Heisman Chess, which is basically called the same thing. That it's called How Much Strategy to Start. And it talks about, yes, you don't need to know a million things in strategy to get up to 16, 1700. Once you can make safe moves on every move, then yes, strategy starts to play a bigger and bigger part of your playing analysis, because at the lower levels, people win because people make unsafe moves, and if you stop making unsafe moves and you take advantage of your opponent's unsafe moves, you can win. But at the higher level, whoever has the better strategy gets the better position, and tactics flow from the better position. So with two 2700 players, the player who wins is almost always the one with better strategy, and eventually he'll get the tactics. But if the 2 players are rated 700, the one guy could have better strategy, but then he can make a terrible blunder and lose the game even though his strategy was superior. So tactics don't always flow from superior strategy for low-rated players. Lastly, let's talk about the endgame. In the endgame, there's 2 types of endgames you want to learn. There's exact endgames, the kind of things that are in Silman's endgame course, like the Lucena and the Philidor, and how to checkmate with a king and a queen against a king, or king and 2 bishops against a king. Those are called exact endgames. But most endgames have more pieces on the board, like a rook and 5 pawns against a rook and 4, or you have a king, a bishop, and a knight and 3 pawns, and your opponent has a king and a rook and 3 pawns, and the bishop and knight's much better than the rook. But how do you win? Well, you're not going to find that in an endgame book. So that's what's called an inexact endgame. I think Grandmaster Soltis was the one who called them exact and inexact endgames. So you're going to start learning some of these basic exact endgames, but then through reading the instructive anthologies and analyzing with good players and playing games out to the end, you're going to slowly learn the ideas, the main principles of the inexact endgames. We talked about one earlier in the video about making sure to... All right, so today we've talked about the 3 showstoppers, which are the safety of your moves and your opponent's moves. We've talked about the activity of all your pieces. We've talked about time management. And we've talked a little bit briefly about openings, middle games, and end games and what you're going to need to know. This is the end of the second video. We're going to have a third video talking about the 4 homeworks, which are the things that I have my students do in between lessons, but it's something anybody can do. You don't have to be taking lessons to do that. And that'll be in the third video about our Chess Improver Club. So we'll see you then. Thanks. Bye.